There we go. I'll toss it back over to you, Bridget.
All right, welcome to the March 16th, 2022 SMI Community Meeting. We have a few items on the agenda today, and I'm pretty sure the very first one is Keith Maddox about the identity binding PR. I think you got that merged, right? So you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. I got it submitted, not merged quite yet, still looking for reviewers
all right.
to review that PR. But yes, essentially it's the PR that I have the proposal open for the identity binding custom resource. I just put it, the spec in the same document as traffic target, traffic target. The only changes that this PR will be making to the spec, I outlined it in the PR description. The only changes we'll be making to the spec would be adding this new resource and then modifying traffic target to accept an optional group along with a kind for source and destination resources. There we go.
Okay. So our call to action right now is we're actually looking for people to review this particular PR.
Yes, we've got all the code owners were tagged on it. I'm not sure how many of these are active. I see you, Bridget, Nick, Lee. But yeah, so I think GitHub is needing 2 approving reviews. So once we get 2 approving reviews, I'll be able to merge that in. And that will kind of kick off a series of actions that we can then take, like generating CRDs in the controller SDK, as well as SDK Go. For the time being, I think there are still folks relying on SDK Go, so it makes sense to, I think, backport that functionality for the time being. And
yeah, definitely people are still using SDK Go. So.
Yeah. So yeah, once that's merged, we can start doing that, and I can finally get traffic targets and Istio implemented, which would be exciting. So that's kind of the lowdown on the identity binding PR. Most of the stuff in the proposal, as well as some additional context, made it into that PR and the spec. So take some time. Anybody watching this or on the recording, or everybody here, take some time, look at it. Let me know if you've got questions. We can have a discussion in GitHub. Is there anything that concerns you, or you felt should be added or removed? We can discuss.
Okay, and we're hoping to get this merged in before the next meeting, or is there a timeline that you're looking for those comments and reviews during? Or
that's kind of semi-related to, I think, the third topic on the agenda, which I guess we can just talk about it a bit.
Sure.
Yes. So Nick has kind of been, you've been the one kind of pushing a lot of this in terms of getting the spec to beta 1 before KubeCon EU. And I think that's, as far as identity binding, I think is part of getting us to that V1 beta 1 status. So as far as timeline on this, I think the sooner the better. Istio support aside, I think identity binding gets traffic target to be a lot more robust of a resource, because now the spec has room for non-Kubernetes, or not non-Kubernetes, but non-service account based access control. And that starts being important for multi-cluster and other things. There are other conversations around modifying some of the resources or collapsing them, which is the second agenda item. So as far as time on identity binding PR, as soon as possible, I would say, for reuse.
I'm just scanning through the PR as you were talking there, and it looks great to me. It's very comprehensive. It's got all of the bits and pieces that I think we would normally cover. So yeah, I hope this is just going to be an I dotting and T crossing, and then we can get this merged in. I think as well, though, as a kind of a precondition to merge, well, maybe not to merge, but to do a release.
Mm-hmm.
we would need to create the controller and the Go SDK objects so that it could be consumed. So maybe the approach is that once we get approval on the PR, because there may be some form changes, we go ahead and do that, and then we can get it merged.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a plan to me. So to repeat what you said back to you, make sure I'm understanding it correctly. Once we get a couple of approvals on the PR and there's no substance changes at that stage, then I'll start working on the actual reference implementations of the CREs in controller and SDK Go. And then at that point, if there are any changes that need to be made when it comes to the fields, maybe things pop up because when you look at the actual CRD definition and examples, then we go ahead and change that in the spec and then merge the spec, cut a release, merge the CRDs. And have
I mean, I think we kind of, because we're gonna, it's actually, you've got it down as V1 Alpha 4. I can't remember, is that our current release, or are we not currently on V1 Alpha 4?
For traffic access, we're on Alpha 3. For traffic access.
Oh my bad, right. It's the traffic routings on Alpha 4, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's that bumper version. Yeah, I think like literally once the spec's approved, it'll literally just be as simple as just merging everything and cutting a tag release, which is incredible. Great work, Keith.
Appreciate it. Matthew, I remember you and I talked privately a little bit around any of this. Do you have anything, any questions or concerns that you'd like to talk about when it comes to any of this?
So the farthest I got was your design proposal. So I've seen the identity binding from that perspective. So two questions. Has it changed from the design? Design docs tend to get stale. So is the PR much different, or has it changed?
No, it's the same, just with some added context.
Yeah,
and
so
some specific questions answered right there in the PR. So what about, why did you not do this? I want to hand that to the doc, just because I feel like that's going to be the front on people's minds. So it's
I'm generally behind it. I think this is a way to advance and evolve the specification in a very good way. So one question I had, and I don't have an answer, so that's why I'm not really strongly bringing it up, but in the identity binding spec, we very explicitly call out the types of identities. And so whenever we extend it, we're going to have to change the CRD. So I was just wondering if any thought went into an abstraction there. And I understand that it starts to get turtles all the way down, but could there be a type, not necessarily an object reference, but we can say there is this type carries this data, this is the data, and then it becomes implementation specific on how that's carried forward from there. Just a question, it's not really a strong, any like strong advisement, but I was thinking about that.
So I think you could, but like, I also think that there is a benefit, and this is again, like, this is just from thinking about this. I think there might be a benefit as well of like having these hard-coded, if you would, or defined, absolutely defined schemes, and that's validation. Because then with the hard defined schemes, what we can actually do in terms of the CRD validation, we can then specify, for example, that pod labels selectors must have, and that the values are within, where I'm not sure we can do that. I could be wrong, but like, can we do that if you have like something which is loose, which is like kind, and then a string representation, and then a kind of a more free floating bit of configuration? I don't know if you can have like, because it's OpenID, isn't it? Like not OpenID, sorry.
This is a great point. This is a great point, Nick. Yeah, statically defined. I think with CRDs, you have a subset of API schema that you can validate against. If we had the full like JSON schema, you can do more, but we don't get the polymorphism with CRDs because it's a subset. So great point. Yeah, we will be able to validate in the API server much closer to the users. So I think that's an advantage with these strong types.
For the record, we don't actually have sort of validating webhooks on the controllers at the moment, but it's definitely something that I think we've talked about that is probably relatively trivial to implement. It's just a matter of, you know, specifying the rules inside of the kube builder annotations for the struts, which would then sort of generate the correct CRD based stuff, which I think could be a really cool thing to add as well. But yeah, I think these are all great questions.
Yeah, and another piece of kind of on the design of the spec in general, when I was thinking about, you know, trying to, how are we going to express all of this? The question came up, okay, why not just put everything in the traffic target resource? Why create a separate resource for identity? And it was really to kind of isolate the two concerns, right? One, traffic target is meant to handle access control for services, you know, who can talk to one another. And then the idea was identity binding would be a resource for what identity does this service, how the service represented as far as identity. And I think if you abstracted it that next level deeper, I think outside of just the validation piece, I think it's a great point, Nick, but I think the obfuscation of having to take one more hop to create another resource kind of decreases the, for lack of a better term, the grokability of being able to look at this resource and see, okay, what are my representations for my objects? You know, I think about this as an extension point, not object services. I think about this as an extension point in something like, you know, I don't know, Kiali or some kind of introspective exploration piece, and being able to go to the CRD and in plain text, you know, read what's there, validate what's there against these. Another piece of the scheme design is that these shouldn't be, you know, in some willy-nilly kind of identification scheme. This should be well-known, well-specced out identification schemes that are used elsewhere outside of the mesh world. And even though they may be primarily used in the mesh, it should be a strong kind of, you know, specification for each one of the schemes. And so the ability there is to be able to, again, with the validation piece, have, you know, validate against those specs easily in plain text without having to take the extra hop. And then also as a cluster operator, you can just, how is this service represented? Look at the identity binding and just see it all right there without having to, you know, I think thinking as a former cluster operator, like that was a big thing for me and for my team. You know, how quickly can I see what this service is? A lot of meshes kind of obfuscate that. I think that identity binding helps kind of bring that forward more. So that's just some of the design decisions, just for some, you were asking about kind of why not have that extra step. And I think readability was in my mind a lot as to that particular decision.
Oh yeah, this is great. This is a great conversation. I do want to specify, I wasn't like suggesting another reference object, but just perhaps like a schema that defined it. But I understand the rationale that you guys are going for, and I just wanted to make sure that we you know, had that conversation. I think this is, like I said, strong step forward. Awesome. No,
absolutely. I really appreciate the question that helps, you know, to bring these things out and make sure we're considering them before moving forward, which is the point of process like this. So thank you for your willingness to bring that forward.
I also want to make an aside to Nick. I think a webhook, like a validating webhook, could be a really cool step forward if we went that direction. So the gateway API guys, I think this is what you guys are referring to, like V2 networking or something, but the gateway API group, sorry about the language, gateway API group is using a validating webhook. We could probably learn some lessons there. There's some There are some impedances, although it's seeming to turn out to be it's turning out to be a success, but there are some challenges.
Yeah, the new controller SDK has conversion webhooks, which was a kind of a step forward, I think, for us. Which, like, you know, Kube Builder is such a dope project to really easily enable that, and like validation webhooks, I think would really enhance the usability for the end user, specifically around like things like identity binding, because, you know, we can potentially do some stuff which is validation beyond CRDs as well in there, right? We could potentially do some intelligent validation, because some stuff we may want as lazy load. I mean, you know, an identity binding. So there's the question of, should an identity binding be created if a spiffy ID doesn't exist? I don't know. Like, I think there are sort of workflows that we can talk about there, which validation webhooks will help with.
Yeah, certainly. You start to get to the second order where you can look at relationships across the resources, and you're not bound by that, by just that single point of identity or a point of information. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Matthew, you brought up the Gateway API group, and that's the second topic on our agenda, I believe. And I'd like to talk about that because I've been giving this a lot of thought, and we've had a couple of other conversations in previous meetings about how do SMI and the Gateway API spec intersect, because there's some overlap in the capabilities and even kind of the style of the specifications and the goals that we have as two independent groups. I was briefly reading over the current state of the spec. I think it's V1 Alpha 2 or Beta 2, I can't remember. But I see a lot of overlap between HTTP route in the Gateway spec and HTTP route group and traffic split in SMI. They seem to accomplish largely the same things with, in my opinion, after reading through it quickly, it seems like the HTTP route resource in Gateway spec is a bit more robust than traffic split currently is, because of things that we've talked about adding, like query param matching and things like that. We've talked about the possibility of kind of collapsing certain SMI resources into Gateway API spec resources in the spec moving forward. And I think the goal there is twofold. One, we kind of align ourselves with the greater Kubernetes ecosystem and kind of preventing that splintering out of competing specifications. And then two, I think that allows SMI to really focus on the delineation between the responsibilities of the Gateway spec and what a service mesh kind of implementation responsibility would be. And that focus, that delineation would allow us to really spend a lot of time on the mesh specific responsibilities, as opposed to having to kind of rewrite and like recreate the wheel, essentially reinvent the wheel on things that have already been worked on by a group of really smart people. I want to kind of
illustrate your point. I've actually just got can I share my screen? Do you mind?
Sure.
I've literally can you enable screen sharing? Good. I've actually just pulled up the current traffic spec and V2 networking, just so that we can actually look at the similarities.
They're highly. It's a heavy overlap. Yeah.
So I can give you a little bit of context on this as well. In that, originally I had a chat with Tim Hockin about V2 networking. I was pre-COVID at KubeCon, and we talked about the similarities, because again, it was like I have the same sentiment that if you have a Kubernetes resource, like, you shouldn't have two which do the same thing. That makes no sense. And I think the key thing when we created things like HTTP root group, that did not exist. the only thing that existed inside of Kubernetes was ingress. So V2 networking was part of the API gateway, gateway V2 spec. And it was sort of influenced by some of the stuff that we done, but as Keith sort of points out, there is well, there are a bunch of things which have been added to the specification, which we've actually been talking about adding and haven't actually got through to. So, I mean, if you kind of look at some of these examples here, I think maybe what would be useful is, like, maybe it's possible to do gap analysis, because I'd be confident that HTTP root is fairly compatible with our HTTP root group. And I'd certainly like to propose that even if it isn't compatible, if we could make it compatible, it would be great to, as Keith says, we concentrate on like things that are like service mesh related, so things like identity binding and stuff like that, traffic access, and anything which is more networking generic, which is kind of routing or splitting, which doesn't necessarily need service mesh. Could we delegate that to networking V1 alpha, which I think would give a better experience for the end user?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that too. I think a gap analysis is probably really important for this exercise. And then thinking about it from that perspective, what I see SMI spec providing is what Gateway is calling policies. And then policies attach at multiple different layers. They can attach to the gateway, they can attach at routes, they can even attach at your back ends. And that's where we can then focus efforts on expanding the policy set, and then do that from the service mesh perspective, but do that job very well, as opposed to some of the routing, which I do see now it starts to converge. We are finding a convergence in all the networking that Gateway is trying to express, from your L4 load balancing outside the cluster all the way through to a service mesh. I am interested in if we would propose a new root object. So Istio, I don't know how many of you guys are working on Istio, but they don't use the gateway resource, they use a mesh resource. And is that something significant for this group to consider? I'm not sure, because I'm not familiar with Istio nor the mesh resource.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I don't know either. I'm not entirely certain.
So last time I checked, I implemented Istio at the role I just left, and my understanding is that Istio is aware of the Gateway API spec, and they have, I think, an experimental kind of feature branch and alpha that they're working on bringing it into compatibility with it, because Istio very much has like this first virtual service, which is probably more, well, they've got their gateway resource, and then they've also got the virtual service, and they kind of interplay. Those combined kind of get you the gateway plus HTTP route. I think HTTP route more virtual service, gateway is more gateway, between the two specs. But I think they are working to come in congruence and to be in compatibility with the gateway spec. The gateway spec in general, I think, is meant to be a common interface, very much like what SMI is trying to be for service meshes. I think Gateway is trying to do that for all sorts of ingress controllers. And since Istio has its own ingress story between gateways and virtual services, I think they're looking to be to be compatible with that spec. So I think that even speaking down the line, will be in congruence even with Istio when it comes to the gateway spec.
Yeah, so I've heard a couple things here that there is appetite. There's an appetite to do the analysis to find a way to collapse SMI and gateway. I do think it's appropriate. As I listen to that group discuss things, they do have a very broad consumer base, all the way from, like I said, L4 to these two service meshes. And when you look at the extrapolation, if you're just saying this is ingress to an endpoint, then you can start seeing how it's just rings of responsibility. The same data or the same CRDs can express ingress to services, ingress to clusters, and then ingress to your, like, for lack of a better term, edge is where I see your L4 load balancers fit. So I think we should be working for a convergence between the two. And then I do see SMI turning into a rich set of policies that we can seed into V1 or V2 networking or the gateway API. I'm sorry, I keep calling it the gateway API.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, I'm just been kind of like looking through sort of HTTP route here, our traffic target, our route and identity binding. And in my mind, I think that it's like, it would be possible, for example, in the rules section here, that you actually just have a, oh, my mouse has gone funny. This actually just references an X networking HTTP route. I don't think that would actually change the functionality of traffic target. I would need to kind of play with things on a technical level in terms of like whether I could actually configure the correct, in Consul's instance, the correct policies in Console to be able to enable that from those resources. But like, I don't see why I couldn't. It, like, and so maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe we just need to raise a proposal that, and I think we said last time I was going to create an issue, and Mike, and we sadly didn't get around, but like maybe there just needs to be an issue started, which is kind of like TLDR. We are thinking of doing this. And then on that issue, we can put some research in there. So we could say that in terms of Console, these resources incorporating HTTP X networking would distill down to this Console policy, which gives the same security and same configuration that we would have had with the existing service mesh HTTP root group. If we can do the same thing for Istio and Linkerd, and sort of Nginx as well, like I think, and all sort of the other, and then I think we can build up a case which would probably state that it is possible without any real manipulation of the kind of the way that the resources glue together today.
Yeah, we're not, so Nginx speaking, we're not current on TCP UDP right now.
Yeah.
We're I think a version behind, but we can do that for HTTP, and I think that's going to go a long way. I think this is a great idea. Yeah.
And I guess with like Nginx as well, like that for your end users, the fact that once I don't like, I think I forget whether Jared said you were working on API gateway support. I think like
we
probably,
are. It's not like, well, I guess I just announced it now, but yes, yeah, we're working on implementation.
I mean, like I can't imagine it would be any surprises not that you're not supporting, Ingress v2 is not something, because Nginx Ingress is like the most popular Ingress in the planet. Unofficial statistics from my mind, but I think that's the truth. So like I think for your end users, the fact that they would only have one set of resources for routing, whether that resourcing is gateway ingress or whether it's kind of internal east-west within Nginx service mesh, that's got to be a good thing for.
Yeah.
rather than having to flip between HTTP root group and HTTP root, which both look exactly the same, but they're not actually the same. And
yeah, collapsing the cognitive load on all the resources, because it is a very Kubernetes APIs are expanding at a ever increasing rate. Where we can find where we can find accord is or convergence, I think is a great goal, which is exactly why I'm going to take this task back to the team to talk about at least HTTP route group, because that's closer to what we have current.
And I'm going to be starting to attend the V2 networking community meetings as well, just to make sure I'm current on what is the work that's happening there. And so when we do, create that issue, we're kind of current on the research for that.
Yeah, excellent. I think the crossover is excellent, is ideal. Yeah, because we've got Nginx has some people that attend.
well, I think we made some good progress. I think then for next week, let's try and get this PR approved, so we can push for that offline with Slack and getting people to put their rubber stamps on that. And let's also try and get that issue created about V2 networking, and then maybe we can kind of discuss that in a little bit more detail next time.
Okay, so it sounds like, I know we ran over time a little bit, and sorry about that, but the discussion was so great, I didn't want to end it. It sounds like what we're going to do is, Nick, you're going to create the issue. Everyone is going to go and look at Keith's PR, and then we will, and Matthew is going to bring the HTTP route group discussion back to his org. And then we'll reconvene in 2 weeks and see where we're at with those. And hopefully we'll get Keith's PR merged in for the SPAC. Does that get us where we need to be?
It does.
Yeah, I think that's success. Yeah, that sounds like success.
All right, fantastic. I think we'll see you all in 2 weeks then. Thank you so much.
Okay. Cheers. Cheers. Thank you.